Imagine being invited to a gourmet, 5-star dinner, a farm-to-table dinner that is served by incredibly talented chefs on a long table on a beautiful evening. Sounds amazing, doesn't it? This delicious dinner was served, and you would have been invited to join me on May 15th, 2015. I'll give you a hint. This dinner was not in a fancy restaurant. It was not in a farm, even though it was a farm-to-table dinner. And it surely wasn't in a private estate. As I sat that evening waiting for the dinner to start on this long table, I saw the moon rising and the sun coming down. But I also saw barbed wire all around the area that I was sitting. This once-in-a-lifetime dinner, which I organized, was called Breaking Bread Behind Bars. And it was held inside Baylor Women's Correctional Institution, the women's prison in the state of Delaware, a small state halfway between New York and Washington. This dinner was the brainchild of Chef Matt Haley. Matt Haley won the James Beard Award for the best chef from humanitarian chef in 2014. And the James Beard Award, for those of you who don't know, is like the Oscars for the food industry. Unfortunately, Matt died in a tragic motorcycle accident in August 2014, just a few weeks after he proposed this idea to me. And I decided to hold this dinner anyway. At the end of this incredibly gourmet dinner, prison warden Wendy Capel got up to thank everybody who was in this prison, who was at this prison attending this dinner. People paid a lot of money to be here, and so she was very grateful. And she said, I would love your help to help build a greenhouse inside this prison so that my women, as she called them, which was her inmates, could grow, produce year-round in the prison for the culinary program. I was standing behind the podium as the organizer with United States Senator Chris Coons, who's a dear friend, and the Commissioner of Statewide Prisons, Rob Koop. And we stepped up to the table at the last minute and said, let's see whether we can raise the money now and then. We did have a captive audience, no pun intended. Nobody could leave us. And so in less than 2 minutes, we raised all the money we needed to build this greenhouse. This unusual dinner began my very unusual journey to help create Second Chances Farm. It was completely unexpected. The prison initiative states that there are 2,500,000 people, to be precise, it's 2,300,000 people are in prisons in the United States. Just repeat that number one more time so you could. That is 2,300,000 people are serving time in prison in the United States. That's a lot of people. The United States has less than 5% of the world's population. Yet, it has 25% of all the prisoners in the world. It's a dubious honor. I won't even try to talk about why that exists, because that requires a whole different TEDx talk. But I will talk about a potential solution, and that's why I'm here. But before we talk about a solution, let's talk about what happens to people when they come out of prison. So I'm going to use an analogy. Some of you may have purchased a home. And when you purchase a home, you sometimes get a mortgage. And when you get a mortgage, the bank generally wants to put a lien against the deed to your house. It's not very unusual. You still get to use the house. And when you finally pay off the mortgage, the mortgage is released, the debt is released, the note is released, and the deed is free and clear. So wouldn't you be surprised if after you paid your mortgage and your debt off, the bank sent you a lovely note saying you still owe the money and the lien is still there? This is exactly what happens to people coming out of prison. In my opinion, when someone is convicted of a crime, served their time, and is released from prison, they have repaid their society their debt. And once they repaid their society the debt, their deed to their life should be returned to them. Otherwise, it's a double jeopardy. You never get free and clear. And that is one of the reasons I did a TEDx event inside the same women's prison, Baylor prison, in July of 2015 on the theme of second chances and redemption. Because it seemed to me that redemption and second chances went hand in hand. And so the concept of why people should be, is not forgiven, they have paid their debt, and why that debt should be redeemed comes out of this event. And so let's talk a little more of what happens to people typically when they come out of prison. I'll use the United States as a model just because it has a wide range of prisons, 50 states. People typically leaving a prison will get somewhere between $0 to $200 when they leave a prison. That's it. Most of them have no housing. Many of them have no family, very few friends to help them when they get home, wherever or whatever home looks like. They even have a bigger problem because when they go into prison, they're required to give up all their identification to whoever they came up with. So typically when they leave a prison, there is no driver's license, no social security card, nothing to prove who they are. This is the beginning of a really complicated problem because without a license or without an ID, you can't even get a job. You can't even apply to prove who you are. You have to get a birth certificate. To get a birth certificate, you've got to find where you were born and get all of that. And so it becomes a very complicated problem trying to figure out how to prove who you are. So I live in Delaware when I'm not in the BVI. So I'm going to use Delaware as an example because Delaware is a small state, so it's a good place to use an example. The average cost to keep somebody in prison in 2017 in Delaware, according to the 2017 annual report of the Delaware Department of Corrections, was over $43,000 per person. Let me repeat that. I know I heard what. So, and that's a bargain. California is much more expensive. $43,000 per year to keep somebody in prison in Delaware, and Delaware is one of the cheaper states. That translated to over $282 million in 1 year, that is 2017, that taxpayers paid to keep people inside prison. It is a very expensive proposition. If that is not bad enough, according to the Delaware Criminal Justice Council, 70% of those who leave prison are rearrested, and over 60% go back to a prison facility within 3 years. That statistic is across the country. The recidivism rate is between 55 and 70% across the United States. It is indeed a revolving door. So I got invited in January of 2016 to join a group of TEDx organizers who had organized events inside prisons to the infamous San Quentin State Prison to kick off TEDx San Quentin. In my group, there were some illustrious people. Former United States Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin, Gavin Newsom, who's currently the governor of California, and we got to hear some pretty remarkable speakers. One of those speakers is Curtis Wall Street Carroll. And his talk was extraordinarily powerful. He was serving a life sentence because California has a 3-strike-and-out rule, even though he didn't actually kill anybody. But when you have 3 strikes in California, it means you serve a life sentence. And he made the point that if most people in prison are good hustlers, they hustle the wrong thing, they didn't have good role models, but they could be productive tax-paying citizens. And he made a profound impact on me. And so I began to think, what could I do about second chances and redemption, which became sort of this theme song. And so later that year, this is 2016, I invited 2 people who had served time in prison to become speakers at TEDx Wilmington, which is my annual conference that I organized. And one of them spoke about vertical farming being the new industry that could transform lives in urban areas and bring food to food deserts. And the other one happened to talk about his journey from coming from prison and successfully reintegrating into a capitalist, a compassionate capitalist. And so I became a fan of compassionate capitalism. I felt that we could create more capitalists. We could really transform lives for people, because what we needed was not handouts, but is to provide opportunities for people to come out of prison and to be able to take full advantage of their talent. So what I ended up was focusing on vertical farming. So vertical farming has been a growing industry for the last 5 to 10 years. There's been over $500 million of venture capital invested in it. That's a lot of venture capital interested. And so I said, how can we take advantage of this? Because the great thing about vertical farms is they can be done locally in all the communities. And so it doesn't have to be in a centralized place. And so people coming out of prison can work in their own communities to create it. So I came up with a formula. Returning citizens, which is what I call the people returning from prison, plus green-collar jobs equals compassionate capitalism. That is the formula by which I am proceeding. So what is a vertical farm? Simply put, it's a plant factory, an elegant plant factory. It can grow in a basement in some cases, and in some cases, a 100,000 square foot warehouse. It can be anywhere in between. Plants are grown, seeds are planted inside. They never go outside. They are a controlled environment, so that means there is nothing else involved other than growing them inside. There's 4 components that we need to grow plants inside. Light, which we typically use LED lights. Water, because water is recirculated. Carbon dioxide, which is free. And nutrients, which typically is found in soil, is now added to water to feed the plants. The best part of a vertical farm or a plant factory, it is soilless. I didn't even know this term existed. It really does exist. There is no soil. And the advantage of having no soil is there is no contamination. All right? And there is no and because it's inside, there is no bird poop, there is no rain, and there is no bugs, and therefore there is no reason to use herbicides or pesticides. Vertical farms can be used in old warehouses and office buildings, which is a way to repurpose them and breathe new life into buildings that do not have any hope. So it is another side benefit of vertical farms. What is the difference between vertical, which farms, which is also plant factories, and traditional farming? ZipGrow, which is a farm in Canada, states that they use less than 95% less water than a traditional field-based farm. That's because the water continuously recirculates, and there's very little evaporation because it's inside a building. The Brightly Farms in New York states that they produce 100 times more food per square foot because it's exceptionally efficient. There are you can grow it 365 days per year, this food, which means that you're not dependent on weather, and most importantly, because it's grown inside, and particularly for indoor farms, most of them do not use pesticide or herbicides. What is one of the advantages? If you're a cancer patient, your oncologist will tell you that you should not eat any produce that is being treated with chemicals. In fact, trying to find that in the US, let alone in the BVI, would be a pretty hard thing. And the great advantage of these lack of pesticides and herbicides means that you can eat it without having any such worry. It is now a $16.5 billion industry, the vertical farm, the organic produce part of it. It is unaffected by weather, it's unaffected by climate, and is unaffected by natural disasters like hurricanes or droughts or floods. So in a place like the British Virgin Islands, where all the food comes from containers shipped from Miami, or most of it is, you can actually be independent of all that shipping by growing your food locally here. The best part is we can harvest to shelf in 24 hours. You can reduce the carbon footprint of transporting the food. Longer shelf life because you only had 24 hours to harvest and get it, so you can stay in your refrigerator longer, and it is more nutrient-rich product. I want to create capitalists, and I am planning to use the opportunity zones in the United States, which were created by the tax law, to provide opportunities for second chances in economically depressed communities. How do we plan to do this? If you are in the United States, you can follow my 7 quick steps. If you're not in the United States, you just forget about my step 1, and you can go to step 2. Step 1 is raise seed money from opportunity zone investors by creating an opportunity fund. Step 2 is find an ugly, unloved warehouse or office building. Unloved is the key word. Step 3, repurpose a building to be ready for hydroponic and vertical farming. Step number 4, cultivate returning citizens as entrepreneurs in residence. Step 5, grow organic and heirloom crops from seed. Step 6, harvest and self-produce. That's very important. You have to make the money. Step 7, turn over the farms to returning citizens. Now they're compassionate capitalists and agripreneurs. I consider myself a compassionate capitalist. I was born and brought up in Kuwait. My parents were from India. My mother was determined to grow vegetables and flowers in a desert that was not hospitable. My earliest memory is working with her in the garden, and this picture that you see is from an orange that was grown on an orange, the first orange that was ever grown in Kuwait, and I'm holding it. So I have a long history of growing gardening. And then my parents won for 3 years the best garden in Kuwait, and the Kuwait Sheikh Jabir gave this wonderful cup. So as I begin this journey of vertical farms, it truly comes from a long tradition of gardening. It comes from a heritage of gardening that I want to now transform into vertical farms. And I want to give an opportunity for others, particularly returning citizens, to actually create an opportunity for them to grow. And this, I believe, we can transform lives. And the very last picture I want to show is very important because this is the picture of Amanda Lemon. She was an inmate at Baylor Women's Correctional Institute when I met her, and she's part of the culinary team at Baylor during Breaking Bread Behind Bars, which I mentioned at the opening. I then invited her to give her TEDx talk in Baylor that year. She has now been released from prison. I have invited her to join me at Second Chances Farm, to be a green-collar worker, then to grow into a capitalist and actually become part owner. She is one of the reasons why I am planning to do Second Chances Farm. I've grown with gardens all my life, from Kuwait to India, from the United States to Virgin Gorda, where I have a beautiful garden. Won't you join me in helping me grow plants and people rather than prisoners? Thank you.